In Zimbabwe, the central bank has announced that it banned the use of multiple currencies as it tries to rein in inflation in the country. The announcement said that forthwith, the US dollar, South African rand and other foreign currencies will no longer be recognized as legal tender in Zimbabwe. The directive said that the country's sole legal tender was its interim currency, the RTGS dollar, a move that ends a decade of dollarization aimed at relaunching the Zimbabwean dollar. In a related move, the central bank hiked its overnight lending rate to 50% from 15% as part of a set of measures to protect the RTGS dollar introduced in February of this year. The news in Zimbabwe was received with skepticism, many questioning what they see as a move intended to be a quick fix for the deep troubles that have constrained economic growth in the country. As my colleague Zimbabwe reporter Blessing Zulu tells me, this all came as a surprise to many, especially those in the business community.
This was a surprise move, and there was no prior notification by the government to indicate that it was going to ban the so-called basket of currencies that Zimbabwe had been using since 2009. So because the Zimbabwe dollar was not performing well, there was hyperinflation from around 2004, 2005. The government was forced to abandon the Zim dollar because prices were going like 3 times a day. And the Zimbabweans needed billions of dollars, sometimes trillions of dollars.
To go buy bread.
Exactly.
I remember pictures of people wheeling around, wheelbarrows to go buy a lot for bread.
Yes.
So what is the inflation rate like in the country right now?
Currently, it's nearly 100%. These are the latest figures from the Zimbabwe National Statistics Agency issued sometime last week.
What has been the reception so far on this announcement in Zimbabwe? How has the business community responded to it?
I think the majority of people that we talk to, including economists, members of the opposition, and even some government officials were actually taken aback by this development because really nobody knows what is going to happen. And all the countries in the world that have dollarized, no country has successfully de-dollarized. And Zimbabwe, if this is successful, this will be actually a first in the world.
A radical economic move.
Indeed. But the fear from the business community and most economists is that what this means is that the government will just be able to print money. You know, the economy was a bit stable because the government was not able to print US dollars. But now, if it is given the key to the printing machine, where Zimbabwe will slide back to the years of before 2008. So, and there are fears that it's going to be another hyperinflationary environment.
What happens if you're a Zimbabwean and you're traveling to, say, South Africa to go visit family or to do shopping? What happens to the monies? Are you able to purchase goods with the Zim dollar, the RTGS?
What they are proposing is that if you have a foreign currency account or an FCA, you are still able to maintain that account with your US dollars. Now,
so if you want to travel,
you travel,
you withdraw and you travel with them.
Yes, because the situation in Zimbabwe is very complicated in that most of the US dollars are sold on the streets, the so-called black market. Yes, and then the government tried to push people to trade it through the banks. It has not been successful. So you have an interbank rate, which is 1:6. 1 US dollar, 6 RTGSs. Right. But if you go on the black market, the parallel market, which is thriving, it's 1:14 today. So that's
1:14.
Yes, that's the difference. So what they are trying to do is to push people to use the formal, the formal channels of accessing foreign currency. But many are agreed that this will not work.
Is there an upside to this economic strategy, say, for example, for people in rural areas or the local person who did not have access to dollars?
Basically, for the majority of Zimbabweans, this policy is not going to change anything because the government, it is simply saying is that you cannot sell your goods in US dollars. So what the business people are simply doing is to multiply by 14 using the parallel market rate, and then they sell you that same
good.
Yes,
at 40 times the value.
Exactly. So it's not like because for some time the government was saying it was 1-to-1. So they were actually forcing people to say you trade 1 RTGS dollars to 1 US dollar. It worked for some time, but eventually, the parallel market started thriving. Yes. So they are trying to undercut that. And of course, they are promising to arrest people. And interestingly, even the ruling ZANU-PF party's youths today were saying that there are some senior government officials linked to President Emerson Mnangagwa who are promoting this thriving black market. So they were naming and shaming them. So what it means is that it's clear that all is not well in Zimbabwe. The wheels are off to 2008.
How do you explain this type of decision-making, especially coming from the Minister of Finance, Mthuli Ncube, a very well-respected economist? What do you think happened? What are some of the forces behind the making of
this?
The
problem is when Professor Mthuli Ncube was hired as an outsider or as a technocrat, I think what he was saying is exactly the opposite of what he is implementing right now. Because he said before he was hired, when many people were speculating that he was going to be hired, he said that he is going to do away with the RTGS dollars because they were causing problems. The government was printing a lot of money. And this was, and the International Monetary Fund as well was complaining that these are quasi-fiscal operations that are actually affecting the economy. So when he came in, many economists had actually predicted that he was not going to be his own man, So he comes in. There are some people, because what the ruling ZANU-PF party in Zimbabwe is trying to do is to try and imitate what is happening in China, where the Communist Party has a say in how you run the economy. But unfortunately, for Zimbabwe, there's a lot of corruption. In China, you know what happens if you are
when you're
arrested and you are detained or you are even killed. But sadly for Zimbabwe, that is not what is happening. So there is another think tank of former government ministers at the ZANU-PF headquarters, the so-called Shake House in Harare, that are directing government
economic policy.
Yes.
Fiscal policy.
So Mthuli might be a technocrat, but he is not being allowed to implement his Harvard economics.
So basically the political forces and the circumstances under which he's operating are much larger than his influence.
Indeed.
And Blessing, thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah. Blessing Zulu is a Zimbabwean reporter with Voice of America Studio 7.